Thanks for listening and subscribing to episode 256 of the Clive Barker podcast. In this episode, Jose and Ryan are joined once again by Marcus to return to the Imaginer art book series with Clive Barker Imaginer 4. Well, welcome. This is episode 256 of the Clive Barker podcast, and we're talking about Imaginer 4 because last week we kind of ran out of time and didn't get a chance to talk about both we stopped at the end of Imaginer 3 and didn't make it to Imaginer 4. So anyway, I'm Ryan.
I'm Joe.
And I'm Marcus.
And hey, good to see you guys again. Well, or here, I guess.
Yeah, good to be with you guys too.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I got my drink right here, and I am stoked, ready to talk about Imaginer 4. And I wanted to let people know that there's a new feature, Beyond the Limits, on the website, so go check it out, about light, wisdom, and sound. It's great to be looking at Imaginer books because, you know, you're getting into this whole Clive Barker painting and Clive Barker art, and it's great to make connections and look at paintings and look back at books that came out and see the sketches and see the evolution of it through the years. So I'm really having a kind of a Clive Barker rediscovery of his art. I pulled out Illustrator 2. I've been looking at that. So it's good times here on under 3 weeks of quarantine.
Yeah.
I have the paperbacks and the hardcovers of those Illustrator books.
Okay.
I was at a in line at a book signing one time, and the guy in front of me had hardcover Illustrator books. I'm like, wait a minute, there's hardcovers? I had no idea. So I went hunted them down.
I still have to collect a few of those because I don't have Illustrator 1, for example. But yeah.
Yeah, I just have the two paperbacks. I don't have the hardcovers yet.
Yeah, I guess they were harder to find, especially the hardcover of 2, I think.
So at this time when they published Imaginer 4, they were at it for almost 5 years, right, publishing this series?
Yeah, so it started in 2014, and Imaginer 4 is 2017.
Okay, so 3 years.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Once Phil and Sarah got going, you know, they just hit the ground running, and it just, you know, came out pretty quickly thereafter.
Yeah, like in the last few months, 7 and 8 came out. So I got both 7 and 8 in the mail, which is great. I'll have to make an article about that. And maybe, Marcus, you can come up with another review from one of those volumes.
Oh, yeah, most definitely.
Yeah, cool.
And I got 8 in the mail 2 days ago.
Nice. Yeah, I got it like maybe 4 days ago. So it just took a little while longer to get to Alaska.
Yeah. And I'm excited about it. I didn't open the plastic, though. It's kind of nice opening these to prepare for the podcast episodes.
Oh, yeah.
And just reading them fresh instead of, you know, I don't want to do it too early and then forget stuff.
Yeah.
This one, Imaginer 4, when I opened it up, it has a print of a painting from Imaginer 3 in it. That what was that one called? Like the leader or it's not shaman. I forget what this one was called. It's the guy holding the staff, and he's got those kind of tendrils coming off of his back in the back.
Oh, yes.
The one that looks like it's made out of fire behind the red background?
Yeah, it's the red backdrop with the vine staff. I think it's leading the way or something along those lines.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was cool. It's nice, the little things that they include in there.
Yeah.
And then with Imaginer 6 and 7, they sent over kind of like thank you postcards in separate mailings, which was nice.
Yeah, when you pre-order, you get those little cards in advance.
I didn't know that. I mean, this was our first. I think this might have been our first time buying them from the site because we got review copies. Prior yeah.
So Making a Mess is the title of the opening of this volume. And the mess is, it's kind of implied that in the opening that some people were kind of wondering, was Clive a writer? Was he a filmmaker? Was he a painter? Or was he something else, right? And I guess at this time people were just amazed at the amount of media that Clive Barker was dominating. He had made, Hellraiser. He had made Nightbreed, back in '93. He was pretty much, hot stuff in LA. Yeah. And he was still cranking out all these paintings, And
it's tough to make. It's tough for people to be able to pigeonhole him when he's doing all this different stuff.
Right. He says here, labels are the curse of our culture. A lot of people have said, well, you do all these things. What do you want to be known as? And I say, I want to be known as an imaginer. Cue credits.
Yeah.
And that's where this series gets the name, Imaginer.
Yeah.
So, Clive is an imaginer. He creates worlds. He wakes up with dreams in his eyes, and he puts pen to paper. He puts ink to canvas, and he just let it rip.
And that's also really, really similar to a problem that he was having where people were trying to classify his fiction. Because it's like, well, what is this? It's not horror. And he came up with fantastique. And it's like, that's a really good word for it, but no bookstore is ever going to put a fantastique section, in their on their shelves.
Yeah. Yeah, when people ask me, I just say dark fantasy.
Yeah.
Just because it's more digestible, I guess, for people to understand.
Tough, but it's also sort of like contemporary. So when you think of fantasy, you think of like Tolkien.
Yeah, yeah.
I like to not use any sort of genre when I tell people about Clive. I just tell them, read this, and then it's like I just want them to be surprised by it, be caught off guard. Because if you, as soon as you apply a label, there's preconceived ideas about what it's going to be like. And I would say if someone had told me, oh yeah, Clive Barker is a horror guy, and then I would read Weaveworld, I'd be like, I'd be surprised because I wouldn't be expecting something like Weaveworld.
But Weaveworld does have some pretty horrific moments in it.
Yeah.
There's the but yeah, I mean it's really not horror. But you could also Stephen King, right? No one has any trouble calling him a horror author, but he's really does more than that. And like, The Dark Tower seems more sort of
cosmic or
fantasy.
Yep. The cover art for the volume is it the one that has? This is the one that has the two guys with the cities in their head, right?
Yes.
Minds at War, I think it's called.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, he says it's an image of imagination as power, as a ferment of furious energy belied by the serene focus of the faces below. And so that kind of, that is kind of like what he wants to, transmit to people is that, hey, look, it's a book. It's going to be, a entertaining story, but then it's also going to take you places, and it's going to take you places you didn't expect.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And again, this one also, just like Imaginer 3, covers paintings from between 1993 and 2012.
Yes.
And there's an opening quote: "Imagination is our way of communication with what is profound in us." So that's kind of a nice quote there. It's just basically saying that imagination is our way of sort of exploring ourselves.
Yeah, which is what Clive has always been doing with his art.
Yeah.
And sometimes things that come out of places we never even knew we had. It's places that are so buried and so profound inside our psyche that sometimes they affect the things that the ideas that we come up with. And then only when we do some self-examining, or only when we put that to paper and we actually look at what came out of our mind, we discover things about ourselves, right? The sort of exploration that you were talking about.
Yeah, and I think painting for Clive is an exploration of his subconscious, of his inner psyche that he is consciously unaware of, and is channeling onto canvas. I know we talked a bit on the last episode, kind of referencing things in this volume here about Clive essentially being a documentarian and just trying to put onto paper, canvas, the images that, he wakes up within his head from dreams or what have you.
Yeah, and he talked about the way he poses the creatures, in these poses, like they're looking at you, or
yes,
as if he's a documentarian, and he's cataloging these creatures and things that he's seeing.
Let me see if I could find that quote that you're referring to.
Was that in 3 or 4?
It's in 4.
Okay.
He says, quote, "It's that thing about wanting to be a documentarian in some way or other. I learned this from Goya, this idea that what you really want to be doing is just making an account of what your mind's eye is seeing. You want to be almost journalistic in it. My approach is one where you actually say, here's this kind of rather dry and unmelodramatic rendering of something which is going on in my mind's eye, and I'm not going to make it more epic than it needs to be. I just want to make a few marks and say, well, here it is." And I think that's why Clive really liked the Sumi ink with just brush, because in such small brush strokes, you could make so much and make something so evocative. Whereas, the oil paintings are a lot more dense and take a lot more time to render.
Right. And I want to just bring out here that I think something that might be a little overlooked, or maybe people underrate this a little bit, is that when Clive uses, brush and paint, I mean like black Sumi ink or Sumi brush, he has a pretty good control of lighting and shadowing, and
yes.
You look at that stuff and you see like when he draws a face, and it's in a very particular style that's also very, very careful in the lighting that it applies to the face, in the shadows, in the way that he applies the shadows to the face, in the way that he applies the black paint as a way of giving it depth and giving it like almost a third dimensionality, if you will. Mm-hmm. I'm looking at some of his, for example, the Chicken King on page 99. The Chicken King on page 637, volume 4. You see the shadows on the face, the shadows on the legs, the shadows on the half torso that the character has. Mm-hmm. Very, very good command of lighting when he uses just nothing but like the white paper and the blank ink. And then, of course, when he added color to the mix, it just gave it a completely different richness to it.
Yeah. And Ryan, the quote that you were referring to, the Stokes say, quote, "As Clive's painted eyes look out at us from weird inhuman forms like blue vision, we are both interrogated by them and given sight of his imagination in return. Rather than a pair of disconnected one-way views, each piece becomes instead a forum for private conversation between seer and viewer, multiplied within a public exhibition space to become a kaleidoscope of visions." And so much of Clive's work is you have these characters, and I know that he later on says that their quote saying, "This is painful, this is difficult, but this is also inevitable." And he talks about how his characters are breaking the fourth wall and demanding that you look at them and that they're seen, even though that some of them are in, quote, twisted and reconfigured conditions. Mm-hmm. And then he later on goes on to say "fuck reality," which is one of my definitely my motto when it comes to art. Yeah,
absolutely. So I appreciate the part where they talk about the mess that this volume is opens with, say, making a mess, is basically the process that he does when painting, right? So they're saying here that when he switched from Rotring pens and very thin lines and very detailed drawings to oils, that it gave his painting kind of a more physicality to it, because you look at the size of those canvases, and the beautiful moment, right? It's like three canvases, and they're like 8 feet by 19 feet long. It's a gigantic piece of work. You know, you need like a ladder to be able to paint all that stuff.
Yeah.
And there's this almost this topology to the paint, right? We've mentioned this several times before.
Yeah.
That he mashes the paint on top of each other in layers, and then sometimes if you see an actual painting in real life, you see that there's there's mountains of paint in certain parts. If you could run your fingers through the canvas, you would see like all this texture from the paint.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
it says,
Oh, just the impasto is so thick.
Yeah, and I like that they.
Go ahead.
I like that they say that the manual labor becomes a prayer, an evocation of the spiritual and the sacred. So I really like the way they put that in, because that's kind of a definition of, to some extent, the creative process, right? It's almost like an act of creation. So in that sense, it is sacred. Go ahead.
And for the first time, I mean, in Clive Barker art books, this Imaginer series actually goes out of its way to try to convey what it's really like up close, to look at and to touch one of these paintings and see the mountain of paint, like you're talking about, when they do these close-up views of the paintings.
Yeah,
and you really didn't get that with the Visions of Heaven and Hell.
Oh no, not at all. And even in the first two Imaginer volumes, the close-up images weren't as frequent as in the later Imaginer volumes. But I mean, as you guys have said before, when you look at these close-up images, it's almost indistinguishable. It's just almost a mass of chaotic color. But as you step back and you see the painting in full, the image is revealed to you. It really does feel like alchemy brought into art.
I particularly like a part here as well where Clive mentions that some of the figures that he comes up with are monstrous sometimes. He calls it a primal urge to create forms that are half animal, half human. That he says that the blurring of the human role is central to the idea of the fantastique. And, that's really what it's perfect, because when you think about it, it's like, what do we fear in horror and fantasy? You fear the monster. You fear the monster not only across the other side of the door, but also the monster inside you. So, your reptilian brain, right? I mean, we have a side of ourselves which is still barely out of the caves. In a lot of ways, Freud came up with this idea that there were forces in our society that, if we're left unchecked, they could erupt into chaos and atrocity. And there's still a lot of people out there who, struggle with their demons, struggle with their inner, passions and appetites. And sometimes there's forces that, turn us into monsters, and people don't even know how that happened, right? Yeah. And I think that's the part of the dark fantasy that we fear the most, is not just the monster that is external from us, but the monster within, and how we control it, and how we can either use it to make peace with the monster and control the monster and make the monster a part of us. So yeah, I mean, that's why some of these characters sometimes are monstrous, and they're representing, in some ways, parts of ourselves that we don't want to look at. Yeah,
I feel, well, in Clive's fiction, a lot of the time, the monsters are only called monstrous because they're not afraid to show their true selves, their true face. It's more of a physicality. It's not actions, where in his fiction, the real monsters are usually the humans.
Right.
And as you said, the humans are repressing some sort of animalistic appetite that is monstrous, even though they aren't quote unquote monsters physically.
Yeah.
Right. I feel like they're just monsters because they're different. They're just different. So anything that is different, sometimes people consider monstrous. Anything that's not according to the norm, right, that comes out of the norm, people sometimes classify that as monstrous or disgusting or an abomination.
Yeah.
And I think it's
The real monsters are people who are repressed and afraid.
Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Remember that, to quote a magic, and I'm paraphrasing here, everything that does evil is in pain.
Yeah. One good visual representation of Clive's is that facsimile poster that you guys have of the wolf wearing a human face that Clive did. That's what springs to mind visually.
And also, it's sometimes the body is different in some of these paintings because he talks about here all kinds of experiments with the body and therefore, by extension, with the mind. So people have altered their body to achieve, expanding their consciousness in several ways over the human history, right? I mean, people have, caused self-mutilation. They've tattooed themselves. They've pierced themselves. They've done all sorts of things to their body to achieve different levels of consciousness, whether through pain, through breathing, through just looking different, alienating themselves from society. And people have called them monsters. And it's just, says right here that experiments with the body, by extension, affect your mind. And he says these things are going on in my work, and sometimes those experiments can be painful. He says my characters are not exactly rising to meet the new day with smiles on their faces. They're saying this is painful, this is difficult, but this is also inevitable. So in Clive's work, this is going to sound like a cliche, but we've mentioned so many times, transformation in Clive's work is an evolution. Yeah. It's something that characters come to terms with and something that they learn that they become different, but it's a difference that is a transformation. So it's not just an external thing that happens to them. It's something that they change from within. So that's the important part. In other horror stories, sometimes people turn into monsters and they just lose their humanity. But sometimes in Clive's work, the transformation turns people into what would appear to be monsters, but they're really just an evolution. They're just an evolution of going beyond the human, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, or even like the Madonna or Jacqueline S. Even just being able to understand like the female half of us.
Yeah,
is a huge transformation that some people just can't accept.
Yeah, and it's funny because I just made that article about light, wisdom, and sound, and page 643, it says right here, no canvas was larger than the one Clive unveiled on June 16, 1993, a 10-foot by 20-foot piece called Shaman, the Metaphysics of Light, Wisdom, and Sound.
Yeah.
Yeah, like there it is. Go check out that article. I'm just doing another plug.
No, you really should. Yeah. It's a long feature piece that goes into the detail of what happened that day, and also the detail about the painting itself and its symbolism.
And it says here something I didn't know, and I'm not sure if Phil and Sarah might have made an omission here or might have confused something, because it says the creation of this painting, Light, Wisdom, and Sound, was an opportunity for Clive to invite members of his new fan club, The Breed, to watch him work. Well, there was a fanzine called The Breed, I think, but Nina Arlene of Cenobium was also there, and she did cover that for Cenobium, which was the Hellraiser newsletter at the time, the magazine.
Yeah,
so I just want to make
that too. If anyone had heard of that as a fan club.
Yeah, that was a magazine that was short-lived called Breed, and there were only like 2 issues, I think. Maybe I'm confusing it with Hellbreed. There was another a newsletter called Hellbreed.
It was that one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of them has like Pinhead in the cover. The other one has Lylesburg or something. So I'm not sure if it's the same, but they mentioned The Breed, and also I just want to add Cenobium was also represented there, and they did cover it for an issue of Cenobium. So there's that. So in 93, it looks like it was one of Clive's first public exhibitions of his work. And people were very curious about the drawings that he had made for New World Pictures, the concept art for Pinhead, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right.
It also seems like Clive was really reluctant to have gallery showings of his art, just because he says, quote, "My fans aren't reverential, which I think is great. Most people stand in the gallery and whisper and then forget what they've seen. The idea is to make art accessible. Art has to be democratic. I loathe elitist art, which is why I've always fallen shy of doing a gallery until now."
That makes sense.
I kind of felt like I was a little reverential.
Well, he skirts kind of this idea that art has to be not just sacred, but also democratic. Yeah. So I think he's managed to reach a good point of balance between the two.
Yes. Because
the subject matter of his painting is oftentimes almost sacred and symbolic and, imposing. I don't want to use the word imposing, but striking in the sense that if I came over this, it's almost like something you would find on like a temple wall, right? I mean, the demon taking out both his eyes on this Best Cutler Gallery flyer on page 638. This looks like religious art almost that you would find in some temple in a mountain somewhere. Yeah. But then the prices of his art are not that high. If you go to the Clive Barker archive, you can still find, Marcus, you're a collector. I mean, you've been able to purchase his art. It's not forbiddingly expensive. I was just going to say that, I think the Clive's prices on the Clive Barker archive are pretty accessible in terms of art collecting.
Yes, yeah.
We're not talking about art that you can get from Home Goods, which sometimes can cost you like hundreds of dollars, and it turns out that it's just a printed print in a cheap frame. Yeah. You can buy an actual sketch that was made with blood, sweat, and tears by Clive Barker, and you can pay it, $400, $600. Or if it's a painting, sometimes $4,000. Still pretty accessible, and in that sense, it is very democratic. And, he's used it in his own books, which you buy Abarat, it's basically like buying an art book with a novel next to it, attached to it. So in that sense, I think he's succeeded in establishing a balance between the sacred and the democratic in his art.
Yeah. Well, that's and I was just joking a little bit because I do understand what you mean. I mean, and is reverential as far as like making it inaccessible. I mean, I'm reverential for his art too.
I think we're all reverential. Yeah. When we see all these paintings in one place, it's like a pilgrimage to the studio that we've all done.
Yeah. Yes, that's a beautiful way to put it. And tying back to you're talking about his take on art being sacred, he says, quote, "I think there's absolutely a way of making art that is sacred and accessible. The act of imagining is sacred. The imaginative impulse is sacred."
Absolutely.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and sometimes this art comes from places that Clive Barker doesn't even completely understand himself. It says right here on page 644, a typical painting has a figure with a snake coming out of its head, a hand looking out of the snake, and an eye popping out of the hand. What does it mean? I asked Barker in a phone interview the other day. Who the hell knows? He says with a laugh. It's a dream image, and I think of it as strangely optimistic, not oppressive or scary, just strange. Part of the pleasure is, here it is, make of this what you will, which is the fun of analyzing a painting, looking at it, let it strike you, let it, get ideas emerging from your brain, that ideas like what David Lynch calls the big fish. You think about things and they pop into your head. Where do they come from? Where do these ideas come from? Your brain just tries to make connections and looks at things as like, I'm looking at the Tetrarch on page 644, and I'm looking at what's basically a study of an image that's not even that detailed. And I'm looking at the torso and I'm thinking those are organs, and they're just splotches. They're just marker like circles and little scratches here and there. But I'm looking at them and my brain is saying those are organs, and then, you're thinking which one of these is the heart, and your mind just starts racing and you start looking at things and coming up with explanations for it. And then you start thinking, and what does it mean? And then your brain kicks into overdrive.
on the next couple of pages, there's light, wisdom, and sound images.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, there's a poster for this tunnel gallery. This is the one they were talking about, right, that had the Hellraiser images in it?
Right,
There's a
yes.
sketch of Frank
I think
there
so.
for the poster.
Frank.
Yep, Frank the Monster.
And then we've talked about this before, the arsonist, when they couldn't, it was in a private collector's possession, and
Yeah.
they couldn't get a good scan of it.
Right, so when
Visions of Heaven and Hell, I think
Yeah,
they
yeah.
wanted it for that, and they couldn't get a good sketch of it. So now, at least we get to see it in a small, a small picture. It's better than nothing.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And Jose, to tie in to what you were saying earlier about looking at art and Clive not having an answer for it, he says, quote, "The paintings are for me as an artist, and I hope for the spectator, like stepping out of a labyrinth and into open air. It's not a test, it's not a quiz. It may be a puzzlement, but I don't have an answer for it. Or if I have an answer, my answer is no more relevant than your answer." And that's the beauty of art, is that we each bring our own interpretation and our own experiences to it, and we each see something different and meaningful in certain things. And that's one of the great things about doing these episodes with you guys, is seeing what paintings stand out to you and mean most to you, and seeing your interpretations. And it's a really, really beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Really joyous thing.
I think there's nothing more, apart from fear, that moves people than art. And in that respect, when Clive says he wanted to be branded an Imagineer, he says he wants to create things out in celluloid, canvas, on the page, in a sufficiently powerful way that they will move people and maybe delight people and arouse people and anger people. So that's what art does to you. You know, you watch a movie, you're marveled, you are fascinated, you cry, you laugh. You read a book that strikes you, like in Magica, for example, for me, I've never cried with a book except when I read a Magica,
Yeah.
I've cried in a scene with Clem, and and it's like, it's a book, but in my mind it's a movie that it's screening in the back of my brain when I'm reading it. And I think that's a real testament when art is not bland. Art evokes feeling, demands meaning from your mind, when it possesses you and it makes you think about it and makes you want to work to understand it and study it and research it. And again, not tooting my own horn, but that's what I felt with Light, Wisdom, and Sound when I was researching for that article. I was just going down a rabbit hole, and I was just like finding these tributaries that were like branching off of the research I was doing. And I was like, okay, I know a lot about Allen Ginsberg, but here I am reading interviews with Allen Ginsberg all of a sudden because he read a sutra at an unveiling of a painting by Clive Barker. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden I'm listening to beat poetry for like half an hour and I'm just reading about Buddhism, and I'm like, oh, okay, I didn't know that. And it's like, that's the beauty of art, that it takes a hold of you and makes you grounded in the culture. It makes you want to know more about why things exist, why things are like this, why this makes me feel this way. And that's, I think, in my personal opinion, that's what Clive's art makes me want to do. It makes me want to understand writing, makes me want to understand fiction, makes me want to understand art and painting, and makes me want to create, just like it does to you.
Yeah, beautifully put. I feel the exact same way.
Thank you, Clive.
Yes.
Well, should we get into the paintings?
Yes.
I love the one that they opened with, and I didn't put this in my notes, but the tunnel, 653, which I'm guessing was maybe this earlier. The tunnel gallery. I wonder if they're related somehow. Probably not.
That's a good idea. I wonder if this was in the tunnel gallery opening.
Yeah, but it says pre-2005, so probably not.
Yeah. Does it look like an Abarat painting to you guys?
It does.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah. It looks like something out of the Abarat because there's a tunnel, but there's also like a face and a strange kind of perspective.
And sort of these fluorescent colors that you normally don't see with Clive's paintings. The color of it is so different.
Yeah.
Right on. And there's some really striking pieces of art in this book.
Yes.
One of them is the Temple of the Four Deities.
Mm-hmm.
I am particularly amazed by this one.
What page is that on?
That's on
57.
Mm-hmm. And again, it looks like it's a pretty big painting, 72 inches by 60. And the subject of this is a gigantic temple with the turducken of deities. Because these deities are kind of like eating each other. They're like little Matryoshka dolls. They're
It also looks a lot like a female sex organ.
Yes, it does.
That's a good point. And you see the little dots of black that obviously represent birds. So that gives you this gigantic scope, this gigantic dimension of this temple, and a little bridge going into the temple, going into like a belly button of God. Lovely, lovely, lovely painting. Very vibrant sky and beautiful clouds. I really love this one.
Yeah, the colors on it are remarkable. And as you said, it gives it a sense of immense scale, that you have this monolithic thing just jutting into the sky.
I think all of these paintings remind me of locations that would be very at home at the Abarat, and I'm pretty sure a lot of these are probably from or will be in the Abarat books to come.
Yeah.
Or left out, because of space or time.
Oh,
Sure.
I hope not.
I do have some other interesting, speaking of Abarat, the Yeba Dim Day, the island that's shaped like a head on page 730. And I know this is a big jump, but that's one of the ones that means a lot to me because the first volume of the Abarat was very important for me. I was fascinated by that book, and I was still to this day one of my favorite Clive Barker books, apart from the Magica. Mm-hmm. And the Yeba Dim Day island is just so crazy. It's just so amazing to see that.
Did you say 730?
I think so, right? Isn't it?
No, that one isn't untitled.
Yeah.
Okay, I must have mistyped it. It's 693. I'm sorry.
Okay.
That's okay.
Yeah, also known as the Straits of Dusk. So I didn't know about that other title on it. It's definitely the one that crystallizes my memory of Abarat is the Yeba Dim Day. That's the one that comes to mind. That's the first island that we see of the Abarat. And to me, it became kind of like represents the Abarat for me.
And this is another one that it gives a sense of really grandiose scale because you have these tiny little red boats. Yeah,
Did you say 690?
693.
Oh, okay. Oh, there we go. Got it.
You have these tiny little red boats that are, just kind of docked offshore of Yeba Dim Day. And then again, this giant monolithic figure rising from the ocean. And
also, there's some kind of a storm, but it also looks like a
shooting stars or something.
Yeah, you can't tell if it's apocalyptic or just or shooting stars. Yeah,
in the Abarat.
Yeah.
In the Abarat, the thing that passes for a sun is like a shooting star, right? A giant comet or something.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's a repetition of motifs that you see in other things, like the cover of this book, Minds at War.
Yeah.
So for some people, their mind is like, I remember, I think it was in, what's that book with Jacob Steep? The one that's... Sacrament. Okay, so in Sacrament, thank you, Ryan. In Sacrament, I think at some point someone says, my mind is like a mud hut, but Jacob's steep mind, it's like a cathedral.
Mm-hmm.
And in this case, some minds are like a city, and in this case, it's literally a city built on top of a head.
Or as Hannibal puts it, the mind palace.
Wow, good. Yeah, that's a memory technique, right?
Yeah.
To memorize things. Fascinating thing. Google up the memory palace technique. It's fascinating. I once started a story that was going to be a Hellraiser story, and I should get back to that actually, because what's the point of saying I started a story and I didn't finish it?
Yeah.
But I started a story about a man in a maximum security prison who is trying to remember how to make an elaborate origami using the memory palace technique to escape his maximum security cell. And I really need to get back to that thing. Darn it.
I'd love to read it, so you have a reader in me.
I definitely have a bunch of pages about that. And now I already said it, so someone out there is probably going to use that, but whatever.
It's going to be Hellraiser 11, and you're going to be so mad.
I'm going to be screwed.
Where's the residuals? Yeah.
Anyway, what paintings do you guys like in this volume?
One for me, speaking of minds being at war, is on 739, and it's called Demons of Night and Day. And it's of two seemingly twin-like gargoyle-esque figures, each standing atop two different cities that are opposite each other. And they're just kind of staring at each other and having a staring contest, if you will.
Yes.
Yeah, standoff, and you have these tiny little black dots again to signify birds, and again give them a sense of really cosmic scale. But just the fact that there's no like one's a demon, one's an angel. They're both very similar in their characteristics.
Yeah, isn't that amazing?
You can't tell from where they're sitting which side is
night or which side is day, which is why I really love it. And it was used as a cover for Gauntlet's version of The Great and Secret Show.
Oh, yeah.
Great and Secret Show, yeah.
Yeah, so that's probably one of my favorite covers of any of Clive's books. But another reason why I really love this piece is a print of it was gifted to me as a birthday present. And Clive had personalized it and then also left me a note, which was really kind. So I have this huge framed up thing of that print with from Clive. Yeah.
How wonderful.
Yeah.
It's definitely a gorgeous pick right there. Yeah. This Demons of Night and Day. What an amazing thing. And I do remember this being the cover for Great and Secret Show.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about you, Ryan?
I have one on 730, the page that we turned to by accident before.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so this one is untitled, and it's a sort of a painting of a person.
Mm-hmm.
This is one that struck me mainly because if you saw this hanging up on somebody's wall and you'd never seen it before, would you know that it was Clive Barker's painting?
Yeah. I remember on the previous episode of Imaginer 3, we talked about the fact that Clive has so many different styles that he can paint and draw in that it's pretty remarkable of trying to, if you didn't know, you wouldn't know that it was a Clive Barker piece.
Yeah, I think so.
This reminds me, and I had this one in my notes as well. This Untitled, for starters, it seems to be an androgynous figure, right? So the figure is pretty flat-chested. There's no bosom on it or anything. The face has like full lips, long hair, but a little bracelet like on their wrist. And it seems like they're just laying back into darkness or maybe standing up at night. And it reminds me of this 1894 Edvard Munch painting called The Madonna. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. It reminded me a little bit of that. Reminded me of Munch in terms of style. But when you look closer to it, you can tell, yes, that it is Clive. But it's very atypically realistic, I would say, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
If it weren't for the steak knife markings around the figure, it would be a lot harder to discern that it was a Clive piece. Just because it is so much of a more realistic portrait of somebody.
Sure. All the scratchiness around it, and all the obvious scratches of the brush and the knife and all that. So, but a good choice there, Ryan. This is one of my favorite ones as well. And it's untitled. Again, Clive could have given this a name. It could have given a name to the figure depicted here. He could have given it a name that would mark it as either male or female, but instead he just chooses to leave it untitled. So I think it's a bold choice, and it adds to the mystery.
This is jumping ahead a bit, but if you guys have read Imaginer 7, Clive talks about the reason why he doesn't title a lot of his works, and it's because he doesn't. Mm-hmm. It's because he doesn't want to
lead the audience.
Yeah, to lead you in any sort of mindset of what you're looking at. An example that he gives in that volume is on 723 of this volume. Mm-hmm. And, when you look at it, it looks like a jellyfish, of a Portuguese man-o'-war jellyfish. But he talks about that he purposefully leaves it untitled because it could also just be an abstract piece of just these crazy, chaotic tendrils of color. You can make of it what you will.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
I have another favorite. It's, of course, the depiction of the Sea of Isabella. I'm trying to figure out what page that is. I just had, here it is. It's page, let's see if I can figure that out, 760. It's around 760 something. 760, I think. The Isabella, oil on canvas, 120 inches by 48. And, of course, for several reasons, this is also the cover of the Abarat Companion book, Beneath the Waves. Is that what it's called?
Beneath the Surface.
Beneath the Surface, thank you. And it's just these beautiful fish. And Marcus, you recently made some paintings about fish as well. So you've clearly been inspired by this.
Yes.
Yeah, I love the fact that some of these fish are things that you might see as existing in our planet, and then others are completely weird. Like there's a fish with tentacles. One part of the body is fish, the other part is tentacles. He has these giant red fish with teeth. There's a tiny little blue shark-like fish, and I just love the way that he composed this. There's a flying fish trying to catch a bug.
Dragonfly.
There's one fish with a shark dorsal fin on it.
Oh yeah.
To the left, yeah.
Yeah, and there's a bottle floating with a message probably inside. So again, giving us that little anchor that we can be there might be something there. There might be a mystery. There might be a message. So he always likes to put something like that.
And I think the Isabella, and I've been thinking about the Isabella and the Quiddity a lot lately, just because of some project that we're working on. But it seems to me that the Isabella and Quiddity are really similar to each other because they both represent the unconscious mind, and that there's so much going on underneath. You could be floating around, ignorant in your red boat. Never look down and see how full it is. I mean, how crowded it is down there.
Yeah,
also almost each sea is a god/goddess in their own right.
Yeah,
I mean, for Everville, you have what is it? The Shu, which are the little squid that represent God, who swim in quiddity.
Right.
Oh,
Zarapushu.
Yeah, the Pushu. Yeah, Pushu. Yeah. Okay, that's what it is.
And the waters have always been kind of a symbolic representation of femininity.
Yeah, even in Magica too.
Sure, and even in other, and for the centuries, in certain works, the waters have always been more seen as female. Even the sailors would call the sea unfair mistress, right? And another thing, I like the thematic that Clive has here. There's a tiny little fish, gray fish, about to be eaten by a yellow and red fish, and then that fish is about to be eaten by a bigger green fish. So there's always a bigger fish.
Yes, to quote Qui-Gon, yes, always a bigger fish.
Yeah, Phantom Menace, you got it. Good catch. I'm dealing with the pros here. Misa Jaja Binks.
Oh, no.
Oh my goodness! How did we get into Phantom Menace? Anyway, yeah. So, of course, Clive has this attachment to Liverpool and living close to the waters. So that's always been a big thing for Clive. The Shaman with Stitches, page 811. That's another one of my big favorites in this volume. 811. Let's go over there real quick. Yeah, sorry about that. 811. I'm just flipping this really, really gently. Okay, here we go. Shaman with Stitches. I love this one. This one is painted in a style that it's kind of different for Clive, but it really works for me.
Very Fauvist.
Yeah,
with the use of color.
Very ethereal because it looks like the figure is almost see-through, right?
Yeah, and you have these spirals and these stars and a moon just kind of floating off on these tendrils into the ether around him. It's really beautiful.
He's got almost these markings in his face and almost like these earrings and these what seem to be like braids, maybe.
Yeah.
Emerging from his chin. So almost like a Cabal kind of figure and long hair, flowing robes. So I always love to see the depiction of shamans and shaman-like entities. And, that's always held a great deal of fascination for me.
That's a really beautiful piece.
My next one is page 824 through 825, since we're in that neighborhood.
Oh, yes.
Has this appeared in Abarat already?
I believe it's from Abarat 2.
Is it the city on the red boat?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you're thinking. Are you thinking about the Wormwood, or the Christopher Carrion boat? Maybe.
Let me look. I know that this was released this was one of the last releases from the real Clive Barker store as a print. It was a specialty print that I wasn't able to purchase in time before they closed.
Oh.
But I want to say it's from Abarat too.
I know it looks very familiar to me as well. I guess.
Yeah, I think it was an anniversary print for either Abarat or Abarat. Yeah, it was published in Abarat too. Okay.
I love the idea of a city built on top of a gigantic boat.
Yeah, I do too. And this sort of got me thinking about the lore of Abarat, and I couldn't remember what this was referencing in the story. I mean, do you, Marcus? Do you remember?
It's been years since I've read Abarat too. Yeah. Been a couple years, so I don't know.
Yeah, like I don't recall this one. At some point. But what's the title on this one? So it just says "City on a Red Boat."
Yeah.
Okay. Yep. Looks
like it's a diptych. Looks like there's a seam in the middle, so there's probably two big canvases on it. It's a fantastic piece. It almost like a world on the water. It's almost like its own island, right? This would, for an archipelago of islands, if this belongs to the Abarat, this should have its own, name and hour by right.
Yeah, and there's so much visual detail in it too, from all the different fish and sharks in the water to the birds in the sky and the spiral like clouds and the
masts themselves are spiral giant towers, right? The mastheads. Yeah. What a wonderful piece here. Yeah. That's pretty tremendous.
Yeah, I can only...
You can see all the fish in the water there.
Yeah. I can only imagine how remarkable that piece looks like in person.
Yeah.
just the amount of
amazing.
detail.
Yeah, I wonder where that is because we didn't get to. I've never seen it in person.
Yeah, I've never seen it either.
It's a world on the water.
Yeah.
Some people would call it a water world. I wonder if Dennis Hopper is the captain of this boat wearing an eye patch.
Yes.
I know. Nobody likes Waterworld. I love it.
Much.
I grew up on it. My sister used to watch it all the time, so I have
it's a great
soft
comedy
spot for it. Yeah,
it's a great comedy.
She didn't watch it enough times for it to make money.
Yeah, right.
Let's see. What else do I have? Oh, there's one that I forgot to mention. Okay, so it's one of the first paintings. I think it's called Leah Lalo. It's let's go back to the beginning of this book, and it's this lady, and she is being surrounded by these tiny little elf-like creatures.
What's the page number?
663.
Okay, thank you.
This is one of those paintings that makes my brain go at 100 miles an hour. Yeah. I want to know what this is. I want to know what this is about. And
we've got these little men, marching.
Yeah.
Are they little men, or is she a giant?
Yeah.
Good point. They look like Smurfs to me. It's like they look like pink Smurfs, and I'm like, this painting has a music to me, and it's la 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 la. But anyway, so I want to know who this lady is. She seems like she's a queen. She seems like she's someone who controls these little people. Maybe she's a goddess. I don't know. I just want to know more about this painting. Who is this amazing creature? Who are these tiny little people? And why is the sky so dark? We got these like roiling dark clouds, metal colored in the back. And that's, I want to know. This painting is a mystery to me. And few paintings have evoked the sense of mystery that this one does to me. I just want this to be in the Abarat books, and I want to know what this is about.
She seems like she's invading somewhere.
It's in Abarat 3.
Is it?
Is it?
Yeah. I believe it's either portraying Matter Motley or one of the seamstresses.
Oh,
and those are little stitchlings, a little stitchling army.
How cool! So now that's going to make me go and actually pick up Abarat 3 because I haven't read the book yet.
Abarat 3 features, in my opinion, the most beautiful, best paintings of the whole series. Excellent.
So my infamy of not having read Abarat 3 is
you're in for a treat.
Yeah. My disloyalty to Abarat. I need to go there and read it because now it's quarantine time. What better time than to throw yourself into the world of the Abarat again?
Well, and we're kind of looking at probably in a couple of months that we will get to that.
Yeah.
It will probably take me a couple of months because that book is huge.
Yeah, it's both page and number and in scale. It's a very, very metaphysical book.
Yeah.
One painting I'd like to bring up is on page 800 and 801.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why I really love the Imaginer series is that it features paintings that I've never seen before. I'm one who has combed the Clive Barker archives on clivebarker.info many, many times, and the one thing that makes me really giddy about this series is that it features paintings that aren't on there and that I've never seen published anywhere or shown anywhere, exhibited anywhere. Right. And the piece on 800 is one of those pieces that I had never seen before, and seeing it really took me aback and blew me away.
It looks almost Nightbreedish, doesn't it? You've got this sort of a newt lizardy face, and then there's another creature holding a staff, and then a green creature, and there's this yellow bird in the foreground.
Yeah, there's so much in it, and it almost feels symbolic in some of the different images that are put into this lizard-esque creature. And the fact that you have this tiny little silhouette of a man to the bottom left standing amongst this giant, it feels really Lovecraftian to me, and just you have man facing this giant cosmic Noctic creature, and I really love it just because it's different than what Clive usually has painted.
I almost missed that little gray figurine down there.
Yeah. But that's the thing, is it gives it such immense scale.
Oh, yeah. Down
And
in
even
the
though-
left corner.
Yeah.
And even though you see different heads to this thing, it seems like there's different bodies. It also, in a certain way, makes it seem like they're all part of the same entity. That's the vibe that I'm getting out of it.
Yeah, it feels like Legion in that it's just this amass of these different creatures mended into one being.
Right. Yeah. That's Ryan is furiously typing now.
Yeah, I just noticed that the show notes are missing on OneNote for 251. So I'm making a space for them.
And then the next couple of pages, it's this lovely rendition underwater of the Fortress of Doom.
Yeah.
Is that what they call that thing that came out of the water with all the super villains lived in?
I forgot about that.
Yeah. No, but this is really exactly like you were saying. It looks almost Lovecraftian, like someone is speaking to an old one, or some sort of entity that is as old as time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Almost also a little. I want to say Kirby-esque, as in Jack Kirby.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a certain kind of there's these circles and kind of straight lines and almost square shapes in it that remind me a little bit, to a certain extent, of Jack Kirby's art. Mm-hmm. And I don't know why I get that vibe from this, but I just felt like I had to mention that.
Yeah.
If you're familiar with the Eternals or even Jack Kirby's work with monster comics, where he created some giant monster, their bodies were very weird shaped, and they did have all this detail and all these weird lines and sometimes hard to discern shapes. And I kind of get that from this one as well.
Yeah, it's a great piece, and that's another one that is featured in Abarat 3.
I would be remiss if I didn't mention that. Again, I feel like this started out as kind of like a self-portrait. The untitled painting on page 785 does remind me of Clive Barker again. I don't know if I mentioned this before, but I think there was another picture.
Yes, yeah.
In Imaginer 3 that I also mentioned something about looking like a self-portrait of Clive. Oh, yeah. This one definitely looks like Clive. He's got the earrings. He's got the beard and mustache, goatee, and he's got the robe. And it just looks like he started out drawing another side of himself, and he just put that on canvas and left it untitled. Mm-hmm.
And it's another one that's very very shamanistic. And I know, Jose, you talked about a piece that was in the introduction where just the color on the chest could represent organs or what have you, and that you were intrigued about what exactly it was. You have the same thing here written on his chest. You have these different symbols of color, and you're not exactly sure what they mean, but it feels like it's something metaphysical and primal.
Yeah.
And of course, you have the each eye consists of two irises, just gazing out from the canvas at you,
seeing what other people wouldn't be able to see.
Yeah,
you got this double vision. Yeah. Fantastic stuff, guys. I mean, there's stuff in here that's just tremendous. I'm looking forward to opening up the 7 and 8 volume, and we still have 5 and 6 to get through.
I do have one more piece that I'd like to bring up.
Sure.
If that's okay. It's on 797.
797. Oh, yes. Two lovers, right?
Yes. It's of two male figures, and they're both laying in a single bed. They're both nude, and they're both cuddling each other. And below the bed, you see two serpents, and both serpents almost seem to represent in color the two different figures on the bed. Yeah. One is of a more flesh tone, and the other is of a bluish tint. And it springs to mind Piopa and Gentle and the Magica when they sleep together. Yeah.
I was thinking that just now.
Yeah. Yes. But one other thing, when I was going through this volume and I was trying to find paintings. The moment I saw this image, a poem by W.H. Auden sprang to mind called Lullaby.
Mm-hmm.
And if I may share with you guys a few lines of this poem.
Go ahead.
Lay your sleeping head, my love, human on my faithless arm. Time and fevers burn away, individual beauty from thoughtful children. And the grave proves the child ephemeral. But in my arms, till the break of day, let the living creature lie, mortal, guilty, but to me, the entirely beautiful. Certainty, fidelity, on the strokes of midnight pass, like vibrations of a bell. The fashionable madmen raise their pedantic, boring cry. Every farthing of the cost, all the dreaded cards foretell, shall be paid. But from this night, not a whisper, not a thought, not to kiss nor look be lost. The poem is a lot longer than that, but what Auden is saying, Auden was a gay man, and at the time of his writing it, that was a crime that could be punishable by death. And he's speaking about laying with his lover, and during that night, the quote-unquote sin of it doesn't matter to him. All that matters is being with his love, because that's what brings you life. And the fashionable madmen raising their pedantic cry amongst the vibrations of a bell is the church bell that is ringing outside, which is that's reminding him of like, oh, this could spell our demise, but it doesn't matter because love will prevail. And that's what I see in this of you have the serpents below the bed that religiously, symbolically represents sin or something forbidden. But to the two characters, it doesn't matter.
That is a beautiful poem that you brought to the table. Yeah.
Thank you.
And the bell is still ringing, and the boring, pedantic cries are still out there. And it's, amazing that we're still dealing with that stuff nowadays.
Yeah.
There's been a hospital that was set up on Central Park, and a part of that hospital to treat coronavirus patients is being handled by a religious organization, so-called Christian organization. Yeah. And they make every caregiver there sign a statement of faith where they admit that, where they agree that, that is a sin to be gay, and that these people will burn in hell, and which is inadmissible. It's by itself, it's completely unacceptable to screen caregivers during a pandemic based on their religious beliefs. I mean, that's crazy.
Yeah.
And we're still dealing with this crap in the 21st century, in 2020.
It's almost like a war crime, but but because this is so crazy and we're all, it's like people are like, well, just let him go because at least it's better than no help. But there probably will be a reckoning, I would think, when this is all over.
Yeah. But like you said, love is what gives us life, right? Love is breath. Love is, it makes... What's the use of love? I mean, what's the use of living when you don't have love? And it's, when you have to hide who you are, when you have to go home and sleep by yourself, and the world keeps like knocking on your head and putting you down. That's why love is so important. That's because love is the thing that makes it worthwhile. Love is love. Love makes the world go around, right?
Yeah.
Beautiful poem, lovely painting.
Yeah.
And yes, I looked at this and you were talking about Gentle and Piopa, and I was like, yes, dude, yes. I was thinking about that just now.
Yeah.
And I just don't visualize Gentle as being bald-headed. But apart from that, you got the snakes under the bed and possibly a snake on top of the bed, but that's a different story. Yeah. But hey, I like to say, and I don't like to use the word hate, but I mean, I don't judge people for who they love, but I do judge people for who they hate.
Yeah.
And I think that might be a fair assessment of judgment. I mean, people always say, well, I don't judge. I judge certain people. because I think there's certain things that are not admissible. They're repugnant to me, certain behaviors and certain ideas and biases and prejudices. I don't think there's any room. We're all part of the same race, right? We're all part of the same mud that stood up and looked up at the stars. And I'm a believer that we're moving from primordial amoebas to eventually becoming cosmic immortals. I would like to believe that idea.
Yeah.
If we don't fuck it up, before we get there.
Yeah.
Every step forward is 2 steps backwards, it seems, but hopefully,
But the arrow of progress, I think, continues to move, and things do tend to move towards equality and tend to move towards justice and of a sort. I mean, it always depends on what society you live in, right? I mean, justice is a thing that could mean so many different things.
Yeah.
But I feel like ultimately there's a humanistic baseline that we're getting there. It might take a while, but eventually it's just people are just going to become smarter, and they'll understand we're all in this together. Lines on the ground don't matter that much when someone needs help. And love is what matters. It's not love people for who they are. Don't hate them for what they aren't. It's all this tribalism that we still haven't shedded in our society. And it's just, I like this pie in the sky, and I have a hat this color, and I like, I like this guy, or I like, whatever. It's all crap that just serves to divide us. And we're living in an age that's becoming so divided. And I hope that we can all come together just like art makes us come together,
Yeah.
And speaking of that, in the afterword, Clive Barker had a poem. Good art is hot bread. And I thought this was so cool. I took a picture of it and posted it on Facebook, when we were reading this. But yeah, he says, good art is hot bread. If it isn't bread, then it isn't art. Though it may seem filling and hot, it must be, or it has no worth. I mean this, that art is for sustenance, not to thrill the palate. It is not occasional, like politics, a seasonal dish. It is not religion's plum, to stop an asking child. It is not meat, like truth hacked off reality and fed to us in our pens. It is bread, and hot, like blood is hot, but smelling of new recipes, not of ourselves. Hot of passion, hot out of mind, hot out of passion, hot out of mind, hot from fiction, kneaded by the hands of our cortex makes to seize heaven.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
That's a strong last line there, yeah.
I know.
And not to keep going too topical, but I mean, we're living in a time right now that we need art. We're all isolated in our homes, and what else is going to keep us sane and is going to give us the mental sustenance of, say, hot bread, other than art.
Look, you're painting, you're drawing, you're writing poetry, Marcus. Ryan, you're painting figurines while we were recording the last episode.
I did today also.
You did today also. I'm writing. Writing is art. It's what everybody can make art, and I'm not gonna say everybody can do good art, but if it's meaningful to you, that's what matters, right? Bob Ross said everybody can paint. All you got to do is just start. But it's but the first few things that you're going to do are probably going to be, one, pretty crappy. Two, you're going to look at them and you're going to think, oh, this is not worth my effort. I'm going to stop. Don't stop. Keep at it. It's like everything. You got to exercise that creative muscle. You got to exercise that craft. Clive didn't become a great artist overnight, and people don't write the great American novel the first time they decide to write a story. Yeah. Otherwise the high schools will be pumping out novels like crazy, and it'd be, we got to start somewhere. Keep at it. get yourself entertained, do some stuff, share it with your friends. That's, if more people found out how to entertain themselves, make art, I think that people wouldn't be so bored when they get retired or when they, when they're stuck at home, right now, not working.
Yeah.
I think society needs to promote more creative outlets for people.
Yeah.
That reminds me also, Marcus, don't you have a web store for your art?
Yeah, I do.
Is that prints that you sell on there?
No, I put a few original ink drawings and paintings on there, yeah.
Oh, cool. Yeah. And what's the address for that?
It's justanoutsider.com/shop.
And that's just Ann, right? Justan.
Yeah,
not like
Justin.
Justin.
Yeah. No, just an outsider. Yeah. Oh, well, thank you for for that.
So people should go check that out.
Oh, thank you.
Support artists.
Yeah. One thing I saw floating around Twitter is it's a sign that says, quote, "If you think artists are useless, try to spend your quarantine without music, books, poems, movies, and paintings."
It's a good point.
Absolutely. Yes.
People would just be staring out the window.
Yeah.
So what's up next on the podcast, Ryan?
Yeah. So this podcast will be going up, and then after that we'll be doing news, and then and then the Clive Barker's A to Z of horror commentaries will be doing C is for Chaos. And it looks like, based on, we did 2 polls, one on Twitter and one on Facebook, and both of them, by a pretty large margin, From Beyond was the one that they picked out of the 3.
Yeah.
Okay.
Woo-hoo.
So,
all right.
From Beyond, Reanimator, and Dagon, right? And From Beyond was the clear winner of all of those. So that's what we'll be doing.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah,
cool. That'd be awesome.
I'm excited. I've never seen any of those 3, so I'm looking forward to this.
Well, you should definitely check out Reanimator too, just for the fun of it.
I will. I'll watch that before we get to that point.
Okay.
So we can talk.
And I got to watch Dagon because I haven't seen Dagon. But From Beyond.
Yeah.
That's awesome. All right, From Beyond it is. I think I mentioned that in one of the previous episodes that was one of my favorites. So I'm very happy. Let's get it done.
I wonder if you can get like a Blu-ray set of those 3 movies.
We'll have to check.
Yeah, I don't know.
Right. I know there's probably a set for like a Reanimator, a trilogy or something, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
And after that, we've got Abarat 3. The Imaginer series will continue with 5 and 6. And then that's it. And this podcast, having no beginning, will have no end. You can find the show notes for this episode and join the discussion over at www.clivebarkercast.com. We've got an archive of past episodes, news, features, and reviews, along with all the ways you can connect with us. You can subscribe on every other place you can find podcasts. Share your thoughts with us, and share our podcast with your friends. The Clive Barker Podcast, or BarkerCast, is an independent editorial podcast and news blog that's not affiliated with or under contract by Clive Barker or Seraphim Inc. This is a labor of love by the fans for the fans.
Thanks for listening.